my position is transparency.
Mm-hmm.
We have to be transparent in any decision we are making in government, and to put these officers, who are literally, the proper role of government is to protect life, liberty, and property. That is exactly what our first responders are doing, is they are fulfilling the proper role of government. They should be line item number one in a budget, is public safety. That's why government formed in the first place, is public safety.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Solid Podcast. We're so excited today, episode 63. We've got a special guest with us today, Michelle Tanner, who is city council here in Southern Utah, and she's also a nurse practitioner that has been very successful in that area as well. And we talked to her about a lot of different things, from politics to family to all different, education for children. We talk about so many different subjects today that I think you guys are going to get a lot out of, whether you're from Southern Utah or you're from another area and you want to know, how can you make an impact in your local community? How can you make an impact in your personal lives that can help spread the word of liberation and freedom and all these concepts that we love here on Solid, to live a solid life. I think you're going to get a lot out of it today. What do you think, Brandon?
Yeah, it was very, very good. I mean, I know for me, it's always good to be educated by people that are really on their game and have an important mission out there. And Michelle definitely has that, and she shared that with us today, and I really loved having her on. So, if you would, make sure you like and subscribe, leave comments on what you'd like to see different, any other guests you'd like to see on the podcast. You can visit thesolidpodcast.com as well, our website, or is it just the podcast? Or I'm sorry,
it's just Solid Podcast.
It's just Solid Podcast, not the Solid. So solidpodcast.com. And that's it. Great. Thanks, Michelle, for being on with us today.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, it was
Loved
awesome.
It. Appreciate it.
Thank you guys again for plugging in today. And remember, stay solid. Is the city a paid position?
It is, but it's more volunteer when you consider. So council members make roughly $17,000 a year.
Oh, okay.
So
pretty much
when you calculate that, you're averaging anywhere from 15, sometimes 40 hours a week, it's like, in fact, I've told people, you cannot go into this if you have any concept or desire for money, at least not if you're going to be honest about it, because I have lost probably 6+ figures just in the last year at my personal business, because so much of my time gets shifted away that I'm not building that like I normally would be, or not physically there like I normally would be. But for me, it's not about money. When I die, when I meet my maker, he doesn't care how much money I had or how big my house was. So I just like to focus on what truly matters and spend my time more intentionally.
Yeah, I actually think we've talked about this before. I think politics should be all volunteer. I mean, you think about like our founding fathers, it was all volunteer.
Right.
I mean, they were all mega successful financially.
Right.
But I think that's what also allowed them to have the thinking and the thought process and the knowledge and the wisdom to be able to guide our country through those times.
Yeah, there's kind of a double thought process to that, because I certainly agree with that. And then there's also the side, though, that you don't want just the elites and those who are wealthy controlling everything, right? You want to be able to have someone who might be a really solid, principled person, but for whatever reason, maybe they just haven't reached that financial success. And so you want them to be able to have opportunity too. And that's really, look at this Congress race, right, that we have going on right now in our own district. These congressmen, they're making close to $200,000 a year. Plus you think of all the perks that come along with it. And I'm thinking that's probably motivating a lot of people to run for those positions, is the money, when that shouldn't be a motivator. So there's kind of this balance of what is the right answer, right? Because we don't want people driven by money, but we also don't want the elites running everything either.
Yeah, good point. What do you think? Do you think there's a solution to those? I mean, what?
Yeah, I think
you thought about it.
I have thought about it, and it's still something that it's a struggle, honestly, for me, because I do feel like it needs to be essentially volunteer. But I'm okay with there being some amount of compensation to at least allow even someone like me, right?
Yeah.
I don't need the money. I can still feed my family without it, but at least there's that little bit of compensation that I'm away from my family a lot.
Makes you feel like it's worth your time.
It makes me feel like there's at least, even though it's not for the money and it's really pennies compared to what I could be making at my normal career, it's at least something to help feed my family.
Yeah.
So there's that balance where I'm not against there being some compensation, but it shouldn't be so high, like Congress, for instance.
Yeah.
Multiple six figures to where that's a driving force in wanting people to choose that career path.
Well, it's always funny to me. You look at, just some of the things you see, like Nancy Pelosi, for example. She made $175,000 a year, and she's got huge net worth, $250 million
like
net worth.
Where did that net worth come from exactly off of $175,000 a year?
Yeah, so I think that there are those, you talk about perks, I think that's probably the biggest perk that I think most politicians get. I saw there's actually a Republican congressman right now. I can't remember his name, but he currently just bought a huge short position on the American economy on the S&P 500, which is crazy to me to think that a congressman could bet against the United States economy.
Interesting.
And not go to jail.
And profit from it.
Yeah.
Not just not go to
Insider
jail, but make millions of dollars because the American economy tanks. So, yeah, I think that, it's a crazy thought process to think about.
Yeah, it's like we need the term limits, right? And you would hope there would be enough compensation to where somebody wouldn't mind doing it, but then also, okay, that's enough.
Yeah,
right.
Almost. It's time for somebody else to take over and do that. And
yes, I'm a huge fan of term limits.
Yeah.
I think that would solve a lot of the issues.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Your story's interesting. I think maybe we should get into that. How did you end up running and into politics? How did that happen for you? Because I think, I just watched it on social media, but I've never had a chance to have that conversation. So how did you end up doing that? What was your driving factor?
Great question, because I literally never had a desire to jump into the political realm. Yeah. I will say throughout my life, and even as a teenager, I was always very liberty-minded. Mm-hmm. I started reading books, for instance, by Glenn Beck when I was a teenager, and he was one of my people I looked to as far as...
Did you have a crush on him like my wife did?
I wouldn't go as far as a crush, but I will say, 19 years old, I flew by myself for the day to Washington, D.C., just for the day to be there for his 828 Restoring Honor Rally is what it was. And I just felt that passion of how important it is that we protect our communities, our God-given freedoms that don't come from government, they come from God, and how vital it is that we realize that and protect that. So I have always been passionate, but I've never had that desire to put my name out there or be in the forefront. So what drove me to that is, first and foremost, being a wife and mother. Once you become a parent, and I think both of you are parents, your world changes. Yeah. All of a sudden, when you are now responsible for another human being in this planet that you brought into this world, I would do anything to make sure that this world is a world that I would want my children to inherit. So when 2020 hit, I had a really big wake-up call. I think we all get busy in our day-to-day lives. I think a lot of times we focus on how terrible the federal government is, and it becomes overwhelming, like, oh, what can I possibly do about that? That's FUBAR, right?
Yeah.
But realizing when all of those mandates were coming out, how quickly those freedoms can be taken, how quickly people will allow that to happen.
I was surprised by how fast people would allow it to happen. Yeah.
I was shocked. I thought for sure, at least here in Utah, that there's no way we would allow these mandates on healthy elementary children with no science at all to support that. And so I really had to make a conscious decision. So as a healthcare provider, I'm a nurse practitioner. My background is actually emergency medicine. Okay. So I had worked in emergency medicine for a decade. And 2020, I was pregnant with my youngest child. I was working in the emergency department, running my business, and here this hits, right? This virus hits. And I was very cautious being a frontline healthcare provider. I wanted to do everything I could to protect my baby, protect my family. Really quickly, however, it was very apparent. I'm not good at a lot of things, but I am good at sniffing out BS really quickly. I know when I'm being lied to. And really quickly, I started seeing the censorship of science.
Yeah.
The propaganda, the flat out lies that were being perpetuated. And I thought, how are we standing for
That's
this?
just it. When it first came out, it's like we were all kind of going, okay, what is this? But after like a month or two, it's like, okay, let's start looking at this.
For
right?
me, it was after getting it. Like at the beginning, I remember when it happened, we were actually doing a meeting. We had a big meeting, 1,000 people showing up, and it was just starting to like happen in the news. And I remember telling Kelsey, like, babe, we're not going to be able to do a meeting next week. And she was like, what? And I'm like, no, seriously, like they're shutting things down. We're not going to be able to do a meeting next week. And like, to put this into perspective, I didn't cancel a meeting for Christmas. Like for me, it was always like, you do a meeting, we're doing a meeting. It was pre-planned. I don't care what happens. And then, we didn't do a meeting. And then, so I was a little bit like, oh, what's going to happen? And then after I got it, I'm like, oh, this is what everybody's freaking out about?
Yeah, it wasn't so bad. I couldn't taste or smell. That part was real.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, that's how I found out I knew that I had it. I went go drink coffee, and it just tastes like hot water.
Right.
So
and that's what I tell people. It's a real man-made virus with a fabricated response.
Yes.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
Good point, yeah.
So I made a really conscious decision, July 2020, that I was going to start speaking out publicly about, from the medical perspective, right? Because I had been doing so much research, being in the position I was in.
And you're seeing it firsthand.
I'm seeing it firsthand.
Yeah, you're 5 months in at that point, right? Well, 4 months in.
Right, yes. And
seeing
kids
the
were about
emergency
to
room.
go back to school. And that mama bear came out in me of, don't you dare mandate something onto my child that A, the science does not support, B, there actually is potential risks associated with this, which we've now seen. It's now been proven. And you're going to force that on children. So I, through that process,
was this mandate originally, sorry to cut you off, but was this mandate originally the masks, or was it?
Yes.
Because the vaccine hadn't come out yet
Correct,
until the following year. So it was really the mask.
This was the mask initially.
Okay, yeah.
Correct. And I wasn't ever anti-mask or anti-shot. I was anti-mandate.
Yeah.
I am pro-sound science,
Yeah.
not pro-fabricated science or propaganda science that we saw all throughout the last few years, essentially. So I had to make a really conscious decision at that point to speak vocally about this. And my family initially thought I was crazy to do so because, as you can imagine, as a business owner, those are kind of some of the topics you don't want to talk about because you can lose business, right? You can lose clientele, especially during that time where it was so divisive if you dared have an opinion outside of the mainstream narrative. And also working at the hospital in the emergency department, I knew there could be potential problems there. They wouldn't like that I was speaking truth, essentially.
So were you seeing at that time, the difference of what the media was reporting versus what was actually happening in the emergency room?
Yes. There were times that the media was actually reporting hospitals are overflowing and literally my hours are being cut.
Yeah.
Because there's not enough
Nothing to do.
people being seen. We're sitting on our hands. And I'm not saying there weren't busy times throughout that period, but every winter is a busy season.
Yeah.
That's cold and flu season every single year. And I actually asked, I said, I want to see the data of our previous cold and flu seasons compared to now. I never was provided that data.
Correct me
or
if I'm wrong,
information.
but if so, my mom used to be at administrar at the same hospital you worked at,
Okay.
and she had told me that about 5 years prior to 2020, there was a very high. I think it was. I don't know if it was like SARS or bird flu or some other thing, and
H1N1.
okay, yeah. And so she was saying that they were doing training and all this training that never actually happened at the hospital, but it was all the exact same stuff that started happening at 2020. Do you remember that happening at the hospital, them doing trainings and stuff?
I personally never went through any of that training. I don't doubt that happened though. I'm sure that does periodically happen.
It made me skeptical thinking, because if my mom's skeptical, it's because my mom's always like, just go along with whatever.
Right.
So that's when I was like, my mom's skeptical, something's up.
Yeah. And I mean, throughout that time, I was talking to a lot of different healthcare providers, and behind the scenes, they were agreeing with me. But again, a lot of motivation comes back to the dollar.
Yeah.
And if someone's risking losing their job,
Yeah.
their livelihood, their reputation, at the end of the day, they won't do it. And so I had to make a really conscious decision, knowing I was risking all of that, to fear God more than man.
Yeah.
And that's truly how I looked at it. In fact, I had a pretty profound experience through that time when I had someone reported me for one of my posts where I was speaking against mandates, and got a call from the administrator of the hospital. And I started to question, am I doing the right thing? Am I risking too much? And I had such a profound experience that said, you need to be a voice.
Yeah.
And that's what I've chosen to follow ever since, come what may, when I lay my head down at night.
Yeah.
Even if someday I'm broke or homeless because I've lost everything, I'll still have everything.
I think the Bud Light and Target and all that has proved that that's probably not going to happen.
I don't think it's going to happen either. But there's always that risk.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that I've lost some business maybe because of it. Or, I mean, ultimately I did end up losing my position, my 10-year career in the emergency department. I was ultimately terminated. And so that was something that was sacrificed, and I did not get the mandated shot.
Yeah.
I had already had the infection. I was actually breastfeeding my baby at the time, which there was no data to show safety in breastfeeding women because they were excluded from the medical trials.
Yeah.
And I'm just not going to not follow something that logically, scientifically doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Something you mentioned there that just really stuck out to me was fear God more than man. And maybe you can talk a little bit more about that, how you gain that, I guess, that testimony of that, because once we I guess become aware that God is there, it gets to a point where, like you say, when you go to bed at night, the whole world can be against you, but if you really have that relationship with God, you're still okay.
Yes.
Because whereas if you deny God, so to speak, and do it, fear man more than God. So maybe talk about that. Did you grow up? I mean, how did you come to that belief system you have there? Because I believe, obviously, that's a fundamental truth. If the whole world had, we'd have a great world living.
Yeah, it is biblical. I posted some of that stuff. It's biblical. What this response. So I'm excited.
And
to
to
hear
me,
your response,
there's no question that a God exists. I just can't fathom being an atheist. There's too many miracles and beauty. In fact, I just came from a dental appointment with my kids, and I was looking at the x-rays, and you can just see how everything is just so intricately, I can't speak today, placed. And there's no question. So
it takes more faith to be an atheist.
Exactly. It totally does. Even logically, it doesn't make sense to me that there's not a divine creator, that we didn't come from a superior being, right? And so I grew up with that instilled in me. I grew up in the Latter-day Saint faith. And that's something, as a Christian, a lot of people don't look at, or the outside world, right, sometimes doesn't look at Latter-day Saints as being Christians, but actually I am deeply ingrained in Christianity, and that's who I look to, is my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, and that's who my relationship is with. In fact, I put out a post on social media recently because I get all sorts of messages, of course, from people being in the position I'm in, and someone had sent me a message saying that they were really surprised to see that my husband and I had gone to the Las Vegas temple recently, because she's also seen pictures of me where I'm not wearing garments.
Oh yeah, I saw that. I did see that one. Yes.
And it was just so interesting. I'm not surprised at all in the culture we're in right now, but what people need to realize is there's a stark difference between culture of any religion. I'm not just singling out one religion. Each religion has their own culture. And then there's the gospel of Jesus Christ. And that's where Christianity comes in, right? And that relationship, those covenants, that is between the individual and God
Yeah.
Amen.
and Jesus Christ.
So true.
Not any church member or what they might think of you. There will always be people criticizing. And if people aren't criticizing, you are not living boldly enough.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's why ultimately we all should be looking to, what does God think of me?
Yeah.
Yep.
Am I doing the right thing?
And that relationship takes work and it takes focus and effort, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
it's much easier to pay attention to the culture because it's in your face.
Right.
But that relationship with God isn't, I mean, you can get to where it's, you make it so it's in your face because you choose to follow him and study and pray and do all the things you need to do to build a relationship.
I don't even know so much of those things rather than anytime I think anytime you build a relationship with anybody, right? Whether it's God or your spouse or your children, it takes effort.
Yep.
And it's just something that you have to wake up every day and choose that you're going to have a great relationship. You know, having a great marriage is not, it's not like you get married and go, hey, we'll see if this thing works. You know, you have to put effort and energy.
Exactly.
You have to think about it. It has to be methodical, and there has to be some intentional things that you do to build a stronger relationship. It doesn't just happen automatically.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people, because culture or whatever it may be, you know, they put this into our minds that in order to have a great relationship with God is just like, oh, you just, you know, decide you're going to do it one day. You don't have to put any effort, and it's just going to happen. And if it doesn't, oh, you're not doing the right thing. It's not true at all.
Right.
It's, you have to be intentional about it, right? I think, you know, doing all the things is important, but it's really being intentional about having a great relationship. And if you do those things, then, you know, it's obvious, I think, in people's lives when you see how they respond to situations or they act when fear happens in their life. How do they respond? You can see if somebody's following Christ. I mean, it's pretty
Absolutely.
obvious.
Yeah. I think so many people, especially in our culture, get focused on the letter of the law or these minute details. I think of the Sadducees and Pharisees, and I think of Christ was criticized for taking too many steps on the Sabbath or performing miracles on the Sabbath. And I just would hope that I would never be one of those people.
And he intentionally did those things.
Right.
It was intentional. It wasn't an accident that he did those things at that time to put it in the face of the Sadducees and the Pharisees.
Exactly.
It was intentional. He knew exactly what he was doing.
Yes.
And I think that example that we learn from is, it's not the letter of the law. Those things I think you should do, right? Like, it's always good to try to do your best. But at the same time, that's not what it's about. It's about a relationship.
Exactly.
So I think if we can, I mean, that's awesome.
And I think people get sidetracked on that too, thinking they have to somehow be perfect in order to have that relationship with God, when in reality, no, we are here to make mistakes. It is not about good choices, bad choices. It is about experiences and learning from every single choice that we make and building upon those. That's what ultimately matters.
It's right, building upon those. So how has your relationship with God gotten since you've made these bold moves? Has it become closer? I mean, talk about that a little bit. Have you noticed more influence in your life, closer relationship, more confidence?
Yes, I truly feel that the more we put that faith and trust in him, the more he puts the faith and trust back in us, and the more guidance we'll receive, the more in tune to those promptings. The more we follow those promptings, the more we will receive and the more we will recognize it. And I've certainly experienced that. I'm far from perfect. Obviously, I will be the first to admit that. But truly, these last 3 years now have been the best 3 years of my life.
That's
despite all of the adversity that's come, the trials, the threats, the hate, the lawsuits, you name it. I feel like I've been through it the past 3 years, but I've never been happier. I've never felt more guidance from above. My family's stronger because of it. So I have zero regrets, and I will keep moving forward and put my trust in God.
Yeah, it's awesome. You know, I posted this right when 2020 started happening, and I could just see it. You know, Joshua 1 says, "Have I not commanded you, be strong and be of good courage? Do not be afraid, nor be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go." There's no rules on whether or not he's with you, right? He's with you wherever you go, right?
Yes.
And you have to have courage. You have to know. And I think a lot of people were afraid during these times, and rather than remembering that God is with you wherever you go, they were so afraid.
Fear is very powerful.
It is. And I think that agenda of people who understand the psychological response of humans. They know that.
Absolutely.
And so there was a reason behind the media campaigns, the social media, all these. There was a reason behind why they did what they did. And most people are so fearful that they didn't even realize that it was a calculated effort to get people to respond a certain way.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well put. Fear is the opposition's greatest weapon. Oh. And he will use that any chance he gets. And we look back to even, I keep calling it the little Eichmann mentality, right? The Eichmann who would say, oh, I didn't do anything wrong. I was just following orders, right? When it came to murdering Jews, it's the same type of mentality that I worry that we do see sometimes in society of, I'm just following orders.
Yeah.
We have to do better than that. Even if you are following someone else's orders, at the end of the day, you are accountable for the decisions you make. You have that personal responsibility. And I saw that so much in my field, in the medical field, and it was heartbreaking to see people have to die alone. How inhumane is that? I don't care if the higher up is telling me I'm not allowed to let that loved one in the room. I'll tell you, I am letting that loved one in the room because that's the right thing to do. And I hope that people learned from this situation so that that never happens again. But that is a big part of human nature, is that little Eichmann mentality.
Yeah, I think a part of that too, and that's why, we've talked about this before, that I think that's why it's so important to be wise with our finances, why it's so important to save and invest your money, get out of debt, live within your means, because then you're a lot less likely to be controlled when you have some sort of financial stability, knowing that someone, if they take your paycheck from you, you can't feed your family, knowing that I could live for a long time without a paycheck because I've been wise in the past. It allowed me to make some wise choices in the future as well and not be controlled by somebody.
Yes. And that's where I could sympathize with some of my colleagues who maybe didn't feel like they could take that bold step that I made by essentially allowing myself to be terminated for not following an unjustified mandate. I thankfully had the foresight. I actually saw the writing on the wall in the medical field years ago.
Okay.
I knew that this was being dictated by government. This was government care. This was sick care. It wasn't about always just doing the right thing for the patient. And that made me sick. I want to always do what's best for the patient. And so that's not to say there's not amazing people in healthcare and there's not a huge need. We need hospitals, right? I don't want to take away the good from that, but also seeing that, I knew I needed to establish something for myself where I could be in control of how I treat my patients. So I'm very blessed that I had that in place prior to 2020, because it did allow me, like you say, that freedom to say, you can't control me.
Right.
So what advice would you give to somebody who hasn't set themselves up yet, or maybe they haven't had a chance? I mean, they're just getting started in life. Something like that happens again, and they're dealt with, you either have to do this or lose your job. That's a tricky place to be in. Any advice you would have for somebody to, because we've sounds like we've all kind of worked hard to get ourselves into a position, but there was a time when I was just starting out. And if I was in a position where I had a job and I had to either do this or lose my job, I don't know I think I know what I would have done, but
I know exactly what I would have done.
I know what I would have done.
Yeah. That choice is there. And like I say, you sympathize with some of those people. So, we're all where we're at. Any advice you would give to somebody?
Lose your job.
Yeah.
That would be my advice.
Yep.
Because it comes back again to, who do you fear more?
Yep.
Fear God more than man. You will figure out a way to make it happen.
Yep.
If you're doing it in good faith and for the right reason. And so that would be my advice.
Good answer.
Lose your job.
Yeah.
I love it, because I believe that by making those decisions, God is also going to open up other doors for you. And then that's going to give you an incredible amount of confidence, right?
Exactly.
To where you know, well, I don't have to be controlled. If I have faith, right? And then you start having that faith. This whole concept of faith is, starts as small as a mustard seed, and then eventually, your faith grows. So if you make those little decisions, that's why your faith grows. That's why we just talking about relationships, why they get stronger. you see those things. So I think it's good for people to be put in those challenging situations.
Yeah, I probably don't give myself enough credit because I don't think I'd be in the position I'm in today if I wouldn't have done the right thing
Dude,
back
think
then.
about how many people told you were crazy.
Yeah,
you were nuts. You were joining that thing.
I know.
Nobody makes it.
So I need my wife here. She'll remind me. She'll go, don't you remember? Like, you did that already. Like, I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah, so,
yeah. I mean, but I think a lot of times that comes with a humble spirit, just saying, trying to put yourself in other people's shoes, having some compassion. And also, I think men are really good at forgetting painful moments. I think God gave us that blessing because then we're willing to go do it again.
Right.
And so I think
it's like childbirth. No one would ever have children again if they truly remembered the pain they go through, right?
It's like stepping on a Lego. I'm teasing. I've just heard that before.
Childbirth and stepping
on a Legos. It's almost the same.
That's a meme on IG, right? Only a man would be dumb enough to
That's very offensive to a woman. So
I don't get offended.
So I've got a question. Okay, so I think St. George is one of the few towns left that actually has some hope. I think it's a great place, incredible. I mean, I
question that sometimes.
Yeah?
I really do. I mean, how many times I walked into somewhere without a mask? Seriously, one time at my daughter's ballet, there was a guy trying to fight me because I wouldn't put on a mask.
Wow.
Yeah. And I finally just told him, dude, you don't like.
Not everybody, but I think for the most part, as a community, we're better off than like a Salt Lake. Salt Lake, I think, is in trouble, right?
Salt Lake's gone. And I believe that St. George is not very far away. Honestly, I think, and I'll tell you why. And this is from my perspective. So I'm the only one sitting here that's not LDS, and I think the LDS that I really respect, and that's why I love St. George. But I believe that because most LDS people are so kind and their response is so I don't want to say passive, but almost passive. That's not the right word.
I'd say passive.
It is the right word.
Yeah. And I think that is what has caused a lot of issues. That's what's caused Salt Lake to be gone. And I believe from the outside looking into a culture that I'm so grateful for, that's why I'm so nervous about it. So many LDS people are not willing to be controversial and rock the boat and stand up and say, no, this is wrong.
There's a difference between being loving and welcoming, right? I think that too many people have welcomed in the wrong things.
Yes.
You can love them. You don't have to welcome the wrong things. So
it's the same
so my
thing
point was though, is just hold on. Is he gets all excited.
It fires me up. It fires me up.
You hit the nail on the head.
Yeah. Absolutely. But I still, I mean, you compare St. George to Vegas or Salt Lake, or there are towns like St. George across the country. Our listeners are all over the country, even some all over the world. So my question would be, I guess, is how important is it that we, I guess, at a local level, pay attention? Yes. And what can we do in towns like St. George to make sure if it is going in the wrong direction, which I hear what you're saying, get it back on track or keep it on track and keep it.
Yes, it is vital. In fact, I can't stress how important it is. And that's ultimately why I got involved as a city councilwoman now, is because I had this epiphany. The federal level is gone. It is FUBAR. And as you're saying, even at the state level, I don't even know anymore. There's some serious concerns. Where we do have the most control and influence is our local communities. And the only way we restore this nation is through a grassroots movement, starting at the local level. Can you imagine if every local community across the country got together and said, enough?
Right.
We are going to elect principled people. We are voting these people that got us into this situation out. And to your point, which you really hit the nail on the head with the culture here, it's been very frustrating to see this, especially now being in my elected position over the last year and a half, to see how that culture has allowed us to be in the situation that we are in right now. And I truly feel that we are one of the last beacons left, but I am passionate that this Washington County is a very, very special area. And you read back our history and you'll be hard pressed to not feel the same. You look at just the promises that were made in this area, and you look at how many people have been flocking. I can't tell you, I hear story after story of people over the last 3 years, especially, who say, I just felt drawn there. We had never been there before. I just knew this is where I was supposed to come. And even I was up in Zion the other day, and some guy stops me and he says, "You're Michelle Tanner." He says, "We just moved here from Seattle. Thank you for being one of the few people who stand for the principles of why we came here, why we moved here." And so here at the local level, I've been telling everyone, this is the most important local election we have ever had in our history. We are truly at this point as a city where we can either restore back some of these principles that make this city, that make America great, individual freedom and liberty and family values, right? We used to really value that here in this community. And I still truly believe that majority of people here do value that.
I think so.
Yeah, I think that actually is probably what makes this place so special.
Yes.
People come here and they realize the family is valued.
Family, 100%. But then there's been this really concerted effort, especially over these last few years. And I saw it pretty immediately from a firsthand experience getting into this position, that a lot of times it's not actually the elected representatives calling the shots, it's the unelected bureaucrats.
Yep.
And if you don't get elected representatives in there who understand the proper role of government, who understand that it's we the people who have that power, where the power is derived from, you get these people in there who don't have a backbone. They might have conservative principles and say, oh yeah, the Constitution, and I value all of these great things. It means nothing if they don't have the backbone and courage to stand alone if they have to once they get in there, because there's people who have been there a long time, unelected bureaucrats. I'm not saying there's not amazing people there too, but there's an agenda as well. And it's very easy to go along to get along once you get into these positions, to rubber stamp these agendas that are being derived behind the scenes. So it's so vital. We have 3 open seats right now, actually, in the city council race. I am not up for re-election.
I would be interested to know. I was reading all of their, I went to all their websites, all their bios. Who do you think, like if you were going to, I don't know if you've endorsed any of those people.
I have.
Who do you think are the best ones?
So I have publicly endorsed 3 candidates, and there's 3 open seats. There's about 6 running who I actually really like and would be totally happy working with. My top 3 who I have had very detailed conversations with, who I've worked with closely, and I know share the values of what this community stands for and have the most importantly backbone to get in there and do the right thing. Eros Mackey, Paula Smith, and Brad Bennett.
Awesome.
Those are my top 3. They've all proven in different areas that they have what it takes to really stand up and do the right thing.
Awesome. Yeah, I know Paula Smith. I was reading on her website, but then they have like a list of questions they ask and then the response, and her response was awesome to a lot of the questions they ask, I thought.
Good. Yeah. Paula, I actually got to know her over a year ago when we were going through the truth and taxation process last year. I don't know if you recall, but the city was trying to raise taxes and they were putting out this sales pitch that it was for public safety, because we can't afford to pay our officers if we don't raise your taxes. Who doesn't want to feel safe, right?
This is where it got controversial during the meeting. I watched this one.
Yeah. So it did get controversial. My position is transparency. We have to be transparent in any decision we are making in government, and to put these officers, who are literally, the proper role of government is to protect life, liberty, and property. That is exactly what our first responders are doing, is they are fulfilling the proper role of government. They should be line item number 1 in a budget, is public safety. That's why government formed in the first place, is public safety. So to put them down here and say, oh, we've spent all this money on golf course clubhouses and all these other things, and we just don't have enough money to pay our officers properly, so we're going to have to raise your taxes. No, that's not how this works. Let's fund them first, and then if there's some lower priority items that there's not funding for, then we need to be transparent with the public of, hey, if we want these things in the community, we're going to have to raise taxes, or we're going to have to find a private way to raise those funds, or some other avenue, right? So that was brought up, and Paula Smith is one who was very active in reaching out to the council and digging through the line items of the budget and saying, well, what about this? What about that? And the level of questions were so intelligent. I'm like, wow, this woman knows her stuff.
Yeah.
And so I have no doubt that she will be one who can get in there, hit the ground running. She's all about eliminating waste. She understands the proper rule of government. Yeah. So I really appreciate that about Paula.
Well, you would think that if people did this, I mean, this is how you should run your personal finances.
Yes.
Right? It's like you have priorities, and then, you know, and people with messed up finances, they put their priorities at the bottom, kind of like you're talking about, and they play first and, you know, save last or invest last. And it's obvious in their life, and it's obviously happening to government. So to me, it's common sense. I don't understand. Yeah. But would you agree that it's the reason why most of these issues have happened was because of these private institutions that are really controlling elected officials, and then the public isn't involved enough to really know what's happening, and these people that are influencing our local governments know that these people aren't, the community's not really involved?
I would say that's the number one issue, is lack of community involvement. Yeah. And we all get busy. I get it. I was that way for years up until 2020, where it's like I was in grad school. I was raising young kids. You know, we're so busy in our day-to-day lives. We have to prioritize what's going on in our local communities, though.
Well, I think an element of that, too, is people are just, they're not aware. They're not educated. They don't even know the principles that this whole country was even established upon, right?
It surprises me when we were trying to get this zoning changed on this piece of property. We would go to these city council meetings, and I was surprised. Everybody there was 70 or 80 or older. There was, I mean, I was by far the youngest person in the room.
Right.
And one time we invited a bunch of our friends to get there and just see what happened. And then the whole room was packed full, which was cool. But prior to that, if they didn't have gray or silver hair, they were, you know, everybody there was older.
Right.
And I've always said, you know, I've always lived in communities. Like right now I live in a community. I'm by far the youngest person. Everybody there's pretty much retired. And I've always told my wife, I choose to live where older people live because they have wisdom. You know, and you always look, if you follow these people, they have wisdom, and you go, oh, this is why they live here. It's a good community to live in.
Right.
And I think the same thing with politics, you know, so if there's a lot of older people there, we should probably be paying attention to that stuff because they've been around long enough to know this is what matters.
Right.
And it's not that they don't have stuff to do as well. They just have enough wisdom to know this matters, and it makes our community better, right?
Absolutely. And I love those meetings where we get a big turnout because truly, that's where we take this country back. That's where we restore principles, as it starts right there. And I know not all elected representatives feel that way. I think there's some who would be more than happy if nobody showed up and they could just do their thing behind the scenes and no one's really paying attention. But that's part of the reason for the podcast that I recently started, is I feel like the word needs to get out there, especially here locally. There needs to be that transparency and an avenue of getting out information, because so many times people will tell me, I had no idea this was going on in our city, or I had no idea this council person donated this money to this leftist organization, or I had no idea this meeting was coming up, or that they were even trying to raise taxes. And so having an avenue where people can go and be informed on some of these issues, I think, is really important.
Yeah, that's awesome. So your podcast, what's the name of your podcast?
The Michelle Tanner Podcast.
Okay, so Michelle Tanner, and how do you spell your last name?
Tanner.
Okay, so Michelle Tanner Podcast, and it's available on all streaming platforms?
Yep, all of your major podcast streaming platforms, Rumble, YouTube, Apple, Amazon, all.
Great.
All of those.
So then, in addition to your podcast, if somebody, you know, whether they're from Southern Utah or somewhere else, like where does somebody go to find out where city council meetings are happening? Where do they find out the agendas and all this kind of stuff? How do people get that information other than your podcast?
Yeah, so everything is public on sgcity.org. So all of the minutes from the meetings have to legally be posted on there. Agendas for upcoming meetings have to legally be posted on there. All of our meetings, excluding very few issues, are open to the public, open public meetings every Thursday, 5 p.m. So, yeah.
And is that how most cities happens. So if somebody's in St. George, that's how they can go find all those. So as most cities, that's the way it works, right?
Yep. And that's a state code that the Open Public Meetings Act, things have to be done. And I assume most states are going to be the same way.
And have something similar. So,
yes.
Okay. Awesome.
Yeah.
Did you know all that? Have you ever?
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, just what the word that just keeps coming to my mind is awareness. I mean, I didn't get into even paying attention to politics until I was in my mid-20s. Just never paid attention. I paid attention to the President of the United States and who was running there, and that's about all I knew. And I think that's probably the case still today, and it's because that's the loudest part that's out there, but that's where we have the least impact.
Exactly.
And all of this local, down at the local level, I mean, I think once people become aware of these donations that are happening to certain areas, and we're all passionate people when it comes to our, like you said, our families earlier, right? Our kids and our communities. But if we are not aware of what's going on and what we can do to maybe help those situations, we can't do anything about it. So
exactly.
I just think like your podcast, or even like this podcast. I mean, people come to this podcast to learn about business or finance or fitness or whatever. But I think it's nice to get on once in a while and go, oh, wow, I need to pay attention at my local level and then see what's going on. And that's just what I'm thinking.
Yeah, because the fact is, you're going to live in a certain area, and you do have influence if you're aware enough to know where your energy can be put in order to change certain things in your community. Because in what I've seen, based on the meetings that I've gone to and the ones that I've watched, I know some of them are even online. I don't know, they're
all online now. Okay. All of our every other week.
Okay, every other.
Online.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So, and I've been surprised by if I just let someone know that they would hop on and go, oh my gosh, I can't believe that is happening. Yeah. Right.
See, they should be doing this in school. They should be getting on with in high school kids and saying, "Hey, here's what's happening at a local level."
And I think
which
they
isn't
do.
Going to happen.
No, I actually think,
do they do that?
Yeah. So I had a.
It never
teacher,
happened in my high school.
Mrs. Abernathy. Shout out Miss Abernathy. I don't know. I know she's here locally.
You got to remember though. How long ago were you in school?
She still runs a magazine here locally.
Okay, maybe she still does.
So what school were you at?
Snow Canyon.
Okay.
And she was awesome, but the problem is I just didn't care. I couldn't see how it changed my life at all, because it didn't. I didn't have any responsibilities, right? Because in high school, you're not thinking about responsibilities. You're just trying to have fun. And I think even a lot of college students are the same way.
Yeah.
So like
that's how I was.
For me, I remember actually I got into a conversation with Sherry Bone one time at your office, and that's really what made me think like, oh my gosh, politics do matter. And at that time it was about the president, and I was like 21, 22. I could care less. Like to me, it didn't matter. My life was the same no matter who was president. But I remember when I had this conversation with her, I started really thinking like, oh my gosh, she's right. Like if this person is passing this law, eventually, in her whole thing, she was talking about a decision that this president had made that I didn't see how it affected my personal life. And then she started teaching me how it affected, the local governments and how decisions, and I started going, oh my gosh, it really does matter.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, it does matter. But prior to that, it didn't matter to me because I didn't have any personal responsibilities. And at this point in my life, it was someone willing to say something and because she was super passionate about politics. Yeah. And I just thought it didn't matter at all because I was just this young kid, And then when she was willing to say something and willing to be, I guess, controversial enough because it wasn't a comfortable conversation. I'm sure you've had a lot of those conversations being in politics, that I left that conversation. She probably just thought that I didn't listen, didn't hear, but I left it being inquisitive, like, man, maybe I should pay more attention. And then it did. It did make me far more aware of what was happening. In fact, I remember at that point, like Obama was running, and I remember, Kelsey's like, it doesn't even matter. And I'm like, no, this dude is going to win. And I could just tell by his charisma, the way he talked, and all of a sudden people thought there's no way. Like nobody knew who he was. And I just thought, like, he's going to win, and it is going to matter, and here's why. And then now we can look back and go, oh my gosh, it did change our country. Whether you were for him or against him, it changed our country. And so you can see how much politics really did matter. And I think now looking back, we're all just old enough to be aware enough about how much that changed our country. But it happened with previous presidents as well. You can go look at every administration throughout the history of our country and realize it changed our country in one direction or another, right? And so I think being aware enough about the impact of local politics and how it really does change the horizon of regional politics or federal politics.
Absolutely.
It makes an impact. It really does.
And
right?
that's why it's so vital that children are receiving the proper education, not the indoctrination that they are literally receiving in our public schools and even charter school.
Yeah.
At least one that I know of here.
Yeah.
Because they are the future, right? Yes. There's been polls done where it's like up to 70% of you think, oh, we don't need the Constitution.
Yeah.
They don't even understand the Constitution.
They never even read it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so it's our responsibility as parents to, number one, make sure we're educating our own kids. But I'm still passionate about the school system and doing everything I can within my power to make sure that we are teaching correct principles and not indoctrination in these schools, because they are who are going to carry on this country. And it's frightening to think some of the things they're being taught and that they're going to be the ones taking over.
What's frightening to me is most parents that have children in schools, they have never read the Constitution. They've never read the Bill of Rights. They've never read the Declaration of Independence. You know, I remember I'd get in these arguments with people about politics, and I would say, how many people signed the Declaration of Independence? And they couldn't tell me. Mm-hmm. And it was like, you don't know these like fundamental principles of what makes our country special, and yet you have an opinion about something you have really no knowledge about. Like, how can you have an opinion on something you have no knowledge about? So I think that's a big problem, because they don't have any knowledge, so they leave it up to these teachers at school.
Right.
They don't know what their kids are being taught because they don't know what they believe themselves.
Right.
You know, and so where do you think like someone should start if they really want to say, you know, all right, I want to understand how our government works without, because it can get complicated.
Right.
But if they want to just learn about where they can have influence or how it works, where does someone start so they can even know whether or not what their kids are learning is good or fundamental or constitutional for that matter?
The number one book.
The Michelle Tanner podcast, Jeff.
The Michelle Tanner podcast. Everybody, though, every American should read The 5,000-Year Leap by Cleon Skousen. I don't know if you've read that.
I have read that, yeah.
But that's one of the eye-opening books discussing the fundamentals of why America has progressed more in the last 200 plus years than the prior 5,000 years prior to America being established.
Right.
And it's the principles, the foundations of freedom, of capitalism, of the free market. And that book does a really good job delving into those things. But also, there's so many online resources. Hillsdale College does a great Constitution course. In fact, and I've been advocating that every elected representative should be forced to take an annual, because I forget things.
Yeah,
there's so much. Even though it's a pretty simple document, there's still a lot to it.
Yes.
So that should be something we are constantly, especially those swearing an oath to it, should be constantly re-educating ourselves on.
We have to do continuing education for all other licenses.
Exactly.
There should absolutely be. Yeah.
When I bring that up in meetings, though, it is crickets in the room. Like, not even that's a good idea.
You don't get your paycheck if you don't do that.
It's because they're worried about you actually testing them on knowledge, like asking them a question.
That's a great idea, though.
Right? I mean, that should be just a very basic thing. And
how do we
it would be so inexpensive.
I feel like I wouldn't want to even be in there if I wasn't doing that on a yearly basis. I wouldn't want to feel like, I'm already ignorant. I hate going into things. I feel ignorant right here, right? Yeah. So I don't like that feeling. So I don't know. I think that would be a really good thing to do.
Yeah.
I mean, you would think that would be something all elected officials would want to do, but I understand why they avoid that conversation, because then it takes effort, and then it's...
So when you're vetting your city council candidates this election, ask them if they would support that. And if they don't, that's probably a big red flag. And I can tell you, the 3 incumbents have not supported that. So,
wow.
I mean, it would make their life easier if they did that. I mean, it's still a tough job. You still got to do everything you got to do. But if you
watched the city council meetings, you would realize that that's probably the exact opposite. Would you agree with that?
No, I've seen a couple. I agree with you. Yeah.
People that really stand, including yourself, right? Because I've watched you stand up for like basic, simple constitutional fundamentals. And I've watched you say something. I won't say the name of the person who is always going against you. It's just crazy to me. But I've watched you say these things, and I'm so shocked at the response of the council when you just say something that is really fundamental.
Right.
And it's almost like what you said was like, I don't even know. I just can't even believe that their response is so
right.
passively aggressive against this fundamental. Do you feel that?
I absolutely feel that. And this goes back to the culture, because I will tell you, I don't doubt that there's a majority of current council members who probably agree with most of my stances.
Yeah.
But again, back to the culture here, because I've been someone who's not afraid of the controversy,
right.
who's not afraid to just say it like it is, which to some people that comes off as too brazen or aggressive. You get this culture over here that worships niceness, that's too afraid to align or look publicly like they align with someone who might be a little too aggressive for them. So instead of saying, yeah, she's right, I agree with that, it's easier image-wise and this is my perception.
Yeah.
It's easier image-wise for them to just kind of sit over here passively in the corner and act like
Sure.
I'm not associated with her.
Yeah.
That's the feeling I get.
Yeah, I think that, I don't know. To me, I think, it goes back to education with kids. I think that us as parents need to take responsibility of our knowledge in education. And then it's a lot easier for us to pay attention to what our children are learning.
Yes.
For my wife and I, our kids don't go to public schools for these reasons. We want to know what our kids are learning.
Amen.
And we want to pour into our children these fundamental, our kids have no idea the issues that are happening in the world.
Yeah.
And I want to keep them naive so that they can grow up with these solid core fundamental principles.
Absolutely.
And then when they hear something that flies in the face of freedom in America and what we stand for, they go, are you crazy? Like, this is not even normal.
So are you homeschooling your kids? And I cannot stress how important that is in our current society to either be homeschooling like you are, or if you are one who is sending your child to a school, you need to be acutely aware. Because I'll tell you from personal experience, I thought I was sending my child last year to a school that was very much aligned with academics and patriotism. And I've learned that culture has shifted quite a bit. I had another mother actually call me from the same fourth grade class that my son was in, which his teacher was phenomenal. However, there was another instructor that came into the room, and apparently, according to this other child in the room, was teaching that it's okay to be gay and lesbian and talking about sexuality, which I have no issue what you choose to do in your personal life or how you live your life. But where does sexuality belong in a fourth grade education? I'm sorry, but my child shouldn't be thinking about their sexual attraction to anyone when they are in the fourth grade.
Yes.
And, that to wearing certain propaganda, rainbow pins that, again, stand what you want to stand for. I have no issue with. This is America. This is about freedom. Where does that belong in an elementary school, though? And a lot of this is being funneled through social emotional learning, which is actually mandated coming from the federal government and the state government. It all comes back to funding. That's what it all is about.
Yep.
And they're pushing this social emotional learning, which on the surface, and all of these schools are doing it. And on the surface, it looks like it's this good thing. And, we're just teaching kids to be kind and how to manage their emotions. But it becomes very subjective to whoever's teaching it. So if you get an activist teaching it, such as at my son's school, it's very easy for that discussion to be shifted into something that's simply not appropriate to be taught to elementary kids.
Yeah. I mean, how old is 9 years old or 10 years old?
9 years old, yes.
Yeah, a 9-year-old. I mean, I don't think most parents are having those conversations with their children at 9 years old, let alone expecting a teacher to be, teaching our children.
Right.
Those
Well,
things.
with as in their face as it is today, you have to almost have those conversations with your kids young, only because it is so in their face. It's pushed into the schools, the public space. It's everywhere. There is this direct assault on youth.
Yeah.
And this sexualization.
Yeah, we had the talk with Bridger. He's only 7. But it was
Really?
the right talk. It wasn't like the agenda.
And that talk belongs with parents.
Correct.
Yeah.
Parents and children. Nobody else has
Correct.
that right to talk to your children about those topics.
Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah, and that should tell you everything you need to know about what's happening at the federal level. The federal government shouldn't be controlling what our kids are learning in schools, yet they are.
Right.
Sorry, Bridger's 9, so 4th grade.
Yeah.
Not 7.
Yeah.
My youngest boy's 7.
Time flies.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I think that's fine if somebody else wants to have, their children learning about these things in the classroom. But I didn't grow up in a class. And to me, it's just like, when you talk about this, I don't know what you called it, social, emotional
learning, SEL.
Like the kid's 9 years old. I mean, how should they be struggling so much emotionally? They shouldn't be.
Right.
So what kind of home are they being raised in?
Right.
Like how messed up is the environment they're being raised in? So to me, I just look at it like a lot of it is mental illness, and where is it coming from?
Right.
Why are people so mentally ill? And I think it has a lot to do with, social media.
Absolutely.
And so, I look at these things and why are we telling kids it's okay to be acceptive of mental illness or issues that cause mental illness, I guess, because if someone has a challenge, I understand they need help. But like, what are the things that are causing all of this that we have to change our entire society to be educating kids about, hey, here's a problem that you're going to have that nobody ever had 20 years ago.
Right.
Like, what's the... so are you saying that in all of this, so as we have this conversation about politics, you being terminated, paying attention to kids' education, getting involved in local government, are you saying that the majority of these problems that we're having in our country today could be easily, or not easily, but could be very well influenced by us getting involved in our local governments?
100%. That is the most important thing we can really do to have an influence and have a voice, is securing our local communities. And I don't want to sound like a doomsdayer necessarily, because I do have a lot of hope and love for America as a whole. But truly just seeing the writing on the wall of what's going on across the country, we have to secure our local communities to make sure that we, at least in our own backyards, are upholding the Constitution, protecting our individual rights, protecting our families, protecting the innocence of children. Yeah. That starts right here at the local level. And there will be a trickle up effect. I can't stress enough how much one person on God's side can make such a huge impact. Because I can't tell you how many times I've, looked at an individual and they've inspired me for something that they have no idea that they even inspired me to do. Or I've had even people across the country reach out to me and say, wow, seeing that you were able to get elected, it inspired me to run for my school board or my local government. So anything we can do personally to strengthen our relationship with God, to figure out, why was I born at this time in history? Mm-hmm. It's not a coincidence that we're all here, that we're all sitting in this room right now. Mm-hmm. It's not a coincidence.
Yeah.
Why are we here? And we need to focus on that, hone in on that, and not be afraid to act on that. And there will be huge influence that ripples from those decisions.
It's awesome. Reminds me of that quote that says, 2 most important times in your life: the day you were born, the day you figure out why.
Yeah.
That's
I love
powerful.
That's a good way. I was actually just, maybe we can finish up with this. So my question for you is, you've got a mantle on you right now. You're very clear on your purpose. You're driven. I can tell you're on it, right? What do you do every day? Or is there a routine is there a morning schedule routine you do? Do you have like a morning prayer work? I mean, spiritual, physical, mental, that you start how do you keep yourself centered? How do you keep yourself focused?
Yeah.
Because you have busy days. You got a husband, you've got kids, you're busy. And then you've got all these other things that you're working on to help all of us. So what do you do every day?
Great question. And there's always room for improvement in that self-care, right? I feel like, especially those of us who are really busy, sometimes it's easy to kind of put ourselves in some areas last, or our self-care. And so for sure, prayer. I mean, that's something that every single day. I make sure that I'm maintaining that communication, right? Other than that, every day is so different, but what I really cherish and value more than anything is the time with my kids. And I've had to really make that conscious effort and decision in realizing the time with our kids is actually so short in this life. You know, once they become teenagers, basically, they're gone. They're doing their own thing. They don't care about hanging out
by
with
age
you.
12, 75% of your time is, I think it's age 12.
Yes, I think I've read that recently.
Kelsey posted yesterday, actually, on her IG, how many days we have at each age with our children. If we spent every day with them, how many days? And it's scary to look at, you know, like when you look at it that way.
And it's easy to get distracted from that when you are busy or, you know, successful. You got to provide for the family, focused on all these other things. But truly, when I mentioned earlier how the last 3 years have been the happiest years of my life, it's the joy that's come from my children, my 9-year-old and now 3-year-old. And any minute I can spend with them and focus on them. And I need to be better about putting down my phone because just like a lot of Americans right now, it becomes an addiction, right? To always be looking at the screen and doing stuff on there. But the more intentional I've become with just playing with my kids and rolling around on the floor, jumping around the trampoline in the backyard, that's where that joy comes from. That's where the grounding comes from. That's where I'm continually renewed with my spirit. So that's something that I try to make sure I'm focusing on every day, regardless of how busy things
awesome.
get.
What a powerful piece of advice.
That really is. I love I don't know, it just seems like the trend out there for the most part. It used to be hustle for 12, 14 hours a day. Now it's like, no, be intentional for 4 to 6 hours a day and then spend health comes before money, family comes before success, all that. You know, there's more of a trend towards this kind of stuff.
I personally think and I've said it before, if you can have it all, you should have it all. And I think you can do it all. I think you can bust it like that and still invest a ton of time and energy into your children. You know, I know Jesse Eitzler. I don't know if you know who Jesse Eitzler is, but his wife is Sarah Blakely, the founder of Spanx.
Oh, okay.
And he's also mega successful in his own right. He's built a bunch of huge companies. And he talked about how he had one of his sons in soccer. And his son just started dominating every soccer game he would show up to. He'd be scoring all these goals, and it was just like almost unfair. And one of the parents asked him one time, like, what in the world did you do with your son to get him so good at soccer? And he said, actually, it was pretty simple. I just simply made a decision to every day spend 5 or 10 minutes with my son playing soccer. And it was a way we could connect and bond, as busy as he was, his wife was. We spent 5 or 10 minutes every single day. But that 5 or 10 minutes every day added up to his son becoming incredibly well, which built his confidence. It built their bond.
Yes.
And so I think not even so much time, how much time with our children, but being intentional, like you said, of investing time into our
being
children.
Present.
And they are the times that we remember when we grow up that we spent with our parents,
right?
Or the intentional moments our parents poured into us. And whether it was with our parents or any other mentor or anybody else who helped us in our lives.
Yeah.
And so I think what an incredible piece of advice that if people really did those things, then they would have more energy. They would have a more passion and more purpose in their life because they have this person in their lives, like their children.
Yeah. And what you're saying is very similar to The Slight Edge. I don't know if you've read that book.
Yes.
But The Slight Edge, it's all about those small daily things that you do every single day that adds up to the huge success in the end, right?
Yep.
And that's exactly what you're describing.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Awesome.
What a great conversation we've had today. I appreciate you coming on today.
Thanks for having me.
Didn't have an agenda, didn't know where it was going to go.
Hey, we went all over. It's great.
Hey,
Yeah,
do you guys
awesome.
mind if I plug a little bit more info for Michelle?
Yeah.
Cool. So Blueform Media has had the pleasure of having Michelle on a lot of podcasts recently.
Yeah.
So her interviews with 435 podcast. Also, all of the people you're backing for running for city council, they're on the 435 podcast. Good. Awesome place to find out who's running for local politics. Podcasting is like the way of the future right now. So many young people are getting into podcasting.
Yeah, and everybody running for president right now is doing the same thing, right? Like, I don't know, we've talked about the RFK and Joe Rogan podcast, which is huge, super good.
Long form content. So I'm applaud you again for starting a podcast, Michelle Tanner podcast, right?
Yep, the Michelle Tanner podcast.
The Michelle.
We'll make sure we tag it.
Yeah. Exactly.
Awesome.
It'll be there.
Appreciate
And
that.
we'll probably, if it's all right with you guys, we'll put links to your interviews that we have in this video as well.
Yeah, let's do that. And then if we can actually put the interviews for those running for city council. So for those people from Southern Utah, they could go.
And just so we're not biased, but 435 is doing every city council member. They're trying to get everybody in there. Robert McFarland's done a great job, but almost everybody that's on the ballot, I think, has time on camera with them. So
that's great.
Love it.
Yeah, a great resource. And if you need to register to vote, you can go to votestg.com. And there's all the information there, too, about Michelle and about everybody that's running. You're not up for election this time, right?
Thankfully, I'm not.
Yeah, that's
campaigning,
what do you got?
right?
2 more years, right?
I do.
That's awesome. But anyway, I just wanted to plug that for everybody.
No, that's awesome. Thank you. I'm glad you posted that.